Welcome to the livecast Conversations with. On this show, my guests and I explore the bumps and triumphs of their journey to extract the gems from their experiences, because success leaves clues, and today we turn those clues into billboards for you. I'm your host, Gene Bernier, founder of Peeled Back, speaker and coactive coach, guiding leaders to ruthlessly pursue a life worth living. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 9 of the Conversations with. Today in this episode, we speak with David Brown, the co-founder and partner of Ascent Employment Law, where he specializes in advising businesses on creating empowering workplaces that align with their values and mission. He understands the transformative power of work and how it can drive innovation, foster community engagement, and create a better world for all. David's approachable humor, plain language communication style, and empowering message makes him a trusted employment advisor in British Columbia. So join in while we dive into Dave's philosophy and how he got to where he is today. Dave, my words cannot do you justice, my friend.
Gene, thank you so much for having me. And I see, congratulations to you. What is this, episode 109?
109.
Fantastic. And I'm just a little disappointed that it took 109 episodes to get me on here with you. So, but I'm glad to be here nonetheless.
We had to wait for the timing to be right to give you this wonderful opportunity to be here. So, those words, they speak to quite what I know of is quite the journey to get where you are today as the co-founder of Ascent Employment Law and all the things that went into it. How about you take us on a little bit of a journey about how you got to where you are today, and we're going to peel it back as you unravel it.
Yeah, thanks so much for this opportunity. So as my title, as my name suggests, I'm a practicing lawyer. So my focus is, and it always has been, on what I kind of broadly call workplace law. So a really easy way of thinking about this is I'm like the legal end of the HR department. So whether that's dealing with contracts and policy development, or assisting with hiring and firings, or dealing with any kind of litigation or workers' compensation claim that would come out of that. That's really the kind of work that I do. Now, over my career, so I've been practicing law for 13 years now, and over my career, it started, very typically, I guess you would say, where I started off as an articling student and then joined an associate role working at larger, more established firms. And then was a real kind of watershed moment for me was in 2020. Obviously, 2020 is a momentous year for a lot of reasons, and I'm sure a lot of people share that was a big year for a lot of reasons, not least of which, of course, was COVID-19. Yeah. But in that year, my partners and I, Trevor Thomas and Richard Johnson, we set out and started our own firm. And the goal of Ascent was really to provide legal services that were in our image, and that were really values aligned. And so what I mean by that is a lot of small businesses, they kind of just start off with an idea and they're just so full of energy and motivation, and you just go out and do it. And for us, we spent, we spent months thinking about the concepts that we were going to be creating in founding Ascent. And it came back really to a couple of key messages. So for starters, our purpose, our mission as a law firm is empowerment. And we do that in a variety of different capacities. So it reflects in the clients that we work with. So we work both with individuals who are going through workplace disruption or some kind of workplace, call it what it is, some kind of workplace trauma, right?
Right.
And we also deal with organizations that are, facing their own kind of workplace challenges. They're facing problems they can't solve on their own. And so part of our message of empowerment is that for the individual, we are your voice, we are your advocate, we are here to help you answer problems that are outside of your control. We are here to help balance the scales a little bit when you're dealing with the company. And then when we're talking about companies that we represent, organizations, we feel that effective HR practices, doing HR well, doing good HR, it can be a competitive advantage. It's a strategic advantage, right?
Right.
Especially when we're in this kind of a labor market where talent is so scarce and finding good people is so hard. Creating an environment where you're not talking so much about terminations, but about more, internal empowerment and promoting people internally and then creating an environment where people thrive. That really gets us high. We really, and it's a very empowering message as well. So that was really kind of our initial focus in starting Ascent. It's empowering our clients, empowering our colleagues, empowering our communities, and empowering anybody that seeks to engage with us. Even sometimes opposing counsel or people that look to us. So it's a strong message, and one that we've kept very close to our hearts for the last 2.5 years.
And I think what's like interesting there is like you said up front that just having the conversation about what empowerment really meant and unraveling all that, and probably a bit of deconstruction and back and forth between you and your partners, took a number of months before committing to making what Ascent has now become, which is a thriving and remote law firm. So
we are a remote law firm, yeah,
and I think
which is a unique part of our offering, yeah.
And I think that's a place I'd love to have a conversation about too here. But as somebody that's diving into a partnership with two other people, how did you guys go about creating, I guess, taking your own medicine by creating the space to allow, which probably was at times challenge. I'm assuming there's some challenging conversations about getting what empowerment meant to all three of you right.
Yeah. Yeah, we went through, I remember this exercise that we did very early on. And we started by just kind of quiet. We all did this exercise at the same time. And we said, think about 3 different people, either in law or outside of law, that you admire. And when you're thinking about them, what are the characteristics or traits that they embody for you, right? And so I remember when I did this, I wrote down like Barack Obama, and I wrote down, 1 or 2 lawyers that I hold in really high esteem, and I thought about like, what characteristics do they have that I thought was unique, and I can't remember the third, but I wrote down like another like really aspirational figure, and then we kind of broke down what kind of characteristics do they hold. So with Barack Obama, for example, it's really interesting to think of like courage and hope and how clear communication and a level of trustworthiness that you don't necessarily get with other candidates, right? And so we all did this exercise, and then we all compared our notes, and it was actually quite telling that there was a lot of overlap. Like we often chose the same person right through this, and then we started listing out our characteristics, and through over a couple of hours where we did this, it helped us really hone in what our core values were as a nascent organization. Right. And we came up with this acronym that we call CHIRP, CHHIRP. So C, it stands for courage. And what we mean by courage is that when you're empowering people, it's, you're not going to be the naive soldier running into battle to get shot up as cannon fodder, but you're going to challenge yourself. You're going to push the limits of your comfort zone. Right. You're going to be taking on positions in advocacy and whatever else you do that scare you a little bit, right? Where you're being that voice of courage for somebody who might feel overwhelmed, or for somebody that might maybe is not feeling very courageous in that moment and they need that support, right? H stands for humanity and care. And what this means is we can't, in doing what we do, we can never lose sight of our humanity and the humanity of the people that we work with.
Right.
And this even applies when we're representing companies, right? Recognizing that if you're going through a termination or if you're making a difficult decision, there's a human being on the other side of that decision. and and that human being has a family and has their own priorities and their own and their own challenges that they're going through. And you have to be mindful of that. You have to have that empathy in recognizing that there's a human consequence to making workplace decisions, or really any kind of business decision. There's always going to be a human consequence to that.
Right.
And it might not change the course that you're taking, but you have to be cognizant of it at least, right? The second H is honesty. And we strive that transparency and clarity in our communications, whether it's with opposing counsel, whether it's with our clients in particular. I like to run by this very simple, basic rule, and I like to call it like no surprises, right? If I'm being transparent and honest in my communication with you, you shouldn't be surprised by an invoice. You shouldn't be surprised when I take a certain course of action that we hadn't discussed and that you hadn't cleared. It all forms part of our service messaging, in that we're honest in our direct in our communication. And again, like, that's so often taken for granted. Honesty. It's sometimes easier to hide inconvenient facts or to tell little white lies, even to people that are close to us, like a client, in order to save face or to save feelings or something like that. But that doesn't create a foundation of trust, right? It's an erosion of trust. Sticking with CHIRP, it's our integrity. Very simple. What this means is that our word is our action. There's alignment between our language and our actions. And again, it's so easy to say, I'll have this to you by Friday, and then just to let Friday come and go and never think of it again, right? Like that's so common. But we really try to hold ourselves to that next level. Like, our integrity holds us to that, right? And it can align in our values and our presentation, how we interact with people. There has to be that integrity. And integrity is like this oneness. It's oneness between our actions and our value set. R, respect. Okay, and we're always professional and respectful in our process. And then P, of course, is professionalism. And once we kind of laid out how we go about empowering through the application of CHIRP, the job became quite easy. But one point that I will leave on this point is, so often companies create these kinds of mission statements or value statements, and it just gets stuck in some panel policy manual somewhere, and nobody thinks about it, and nobody can even remember it, right? We talk about this constantly. It is brought up literally, and I'm not even exaggerating this, but we start every meeting with a recitation of CHIRP and anecdotes about how we lived up to CHIRP in the following week.
I was just about to ask, how do you add storytelling and stuff to make that something that's more than just that, like you said, so it's not just stuck in some manual or posted up on the wall. You guys have integrated the act of telling an anecdote of something that has happened in a way to actually, probably, if I'm leaning a little into this, maybe recognize other people on your team as well for living up to CHIRP on a weekly basis.
We do. So we have our staff meetings every Tuesday. And at the start of our staff meetings, we recite CHIRP, and then we ask for a story. And most of the time, we look to do it internally, right?
Yeah.
So went above and beyond in their care for this client, and I had the opportunity to witness that. Or so I know was dealing with a really difficult person, but even in the midst of a difficult conversation, they were still respectful and professional. I really honor that, right? And now it's not always possible to, because it's a day-to-day job. Sometimes law is a very mundane job as well, right? You sit in your office and you're just typing away all day long. But when we can't find internal examples, we don't hesitate to look to our broader community, right? And so I remember last year, I brought up Vladimir Zelensky, right? And how, when you look at the president of Ukraine, how it's actually incredible how one person has embodied all of our values, right? Courage, humanity, honesty, integrity, professionalism, respect. And so we celebrate that, right? Or we look to activists, or we had another example. We were talking about feminist activists in Iran, and somebody was talking about how this was a model for them and how they admired that trait. Well, all we're doing is we're we're finding real life examples that we can bring home to benchmark ourselves and to, to
Right.
hold ourselves and say, you know, it's us too. It's not a fairy tale. It might not be on a scale of an international conflict, but we too can show courage in our work
Right.
and humanity in our work.
Well, I think it's interesting hearing as you guys built these. Now you've not just integrated, but like made it a part of being a values driven company, about speaking back to how the values tie into it. I'm going to kind of lead here, I guess, a little bit. Is like my assumption next is that now this also becomes part of how you evaluate how everybody's working on the team instead of just purely on that performance. You've got five very important, I don't know, we want to call them metrics or like the values, but you have a very clear way of saying how do we identify them. And then there's, again, honesty comes right back into this. It's like there's no surprises around how you then reapply that within your team.
Yeah, it is. And now the thing is like we don't expect perfection, right? But really what it does, and we don't expect that everybody's going to embody all of our values all the time.
Yeah.
I know that I don't all the time, right? Like I trip up, I make mistakes, I show cowardice sometimes, or I practice avoidance sometimes because I'm human, right? And
Yeah.
I'm not going to fault myself for that at times. But what we're looking at in hiring and in ongoing staffing, there has to be an ongoing higher level commitment to these principles that we just talked about. If somebody came onto our team and their singular focus was making money, don't get me wrong, it's a business. Money is important, but I always look at money as being a positive secondary effect of acting on our mission, right?
Mm,
And but if somebody didn't have that mindset, then they're probably not a good fit for our team.
right.
They could easily be a very good fit for another team, right? But here, it's not our singular drive to be a profitable business. We are first and foremost citizens in our community, and we have to start with that as our anchor point, right? So what we're looking for is, do we see consistent alignment with most of our values most of the time? And then secondly, we ask ourselves when we're kind of conducting periodic reviews of staff or when we're looking to bring people on, three what I'm going to call like fundamental questions.
Right.
Number one, do they get it? Do they get what we're trying to do here? Do they get the message of empowerment? Number two, do they want it? Because you can get it but not care, not want it, right?
Right.
And then third, do they have the capacity to do it?
Mm,
And that speaks to, it can speak to like competence or skill set, but is there a willingness to put in the effort to get there? And
right.
I can confidently say that right now, everyone on our team says, yes, yes, yes. They get it, they want it, and they have the capacity to get there. They're either working there or they are there, right? And then on top of that, we see consistent and majority value alignment most of the time. And that's a really simple benchmark to determining whether somebody is going to be a long-term fit for what you're trying to create.
Yeah. And it, not once in any event have you talked about like their peer performance or anything along those lines. It's like, do we have the right people on the bus in the right seats? And this is how we're going to value them as a human. And they contribute to us as a business, as an organization, fulfilling on our promise to empower workplace law across Canada and BC specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to pretend it doesn't exist. It does.
Yeah.
Like, we are still a business. We are still trying to, we have to be viable, right?
Yeah.
But we have a lot of patience for people in getting to that performance side
Right.
if they're broadly showing alignment in all of their areas. Those are skills that can be taught, right? Those are if it's a question of capacity, that can grow, that can get there, over time.
Right.
The law, we kind of joke about this. Like employment law, don't get me wrong, it's important law, but it's not rocket law, right? Like we're not dealing like international cross-border tax and mergers and acquisitions or anything
Right.
like this. Um, we can teach these skill sets. These skill sets exist. You can't as easily teach empathy.
What do you think the difference between teaching those skills and encouraging living to those values, like hitting the three yeses that you have? Because I hear the way you speak about this is like brought up this idea is like, well, there's certain things that can be taught, like the skills and the law, and there's another set that kind of gets caught, by through the modeling and seeing that. So it's like encouragement versus education. Where does that sit for you, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've generally found is we're quite public in our messaging and in our interviewing process about what we're trying to create here. And it attracts a certain personality. It attracts, those candidates. And so once people are with us, I find that it's we don't need to spend time and like teaching them about some of these underlying values. They were drawn to us for a reason.
Right.
And so where as a leader in this firm, we spend quite a bit of time uh, talking about capacity building and lawyering and things like that. And that's where we work with our associates, or we work with even our partners, right? And we've got a very formal mentorship program. We talk about file issues, we talk about substantive issues in law, and to support that learning. But I've never had to. I mean, there have been isolated examples, but it's very rare that I need to sit down with somebody and say, your conduct here is, it's not showing alignment with what we are.
Right.
Thankfully, like those opportunities, those
Right.
times have not shown up very commonly.
And
And I
that's
think
incredible to
because,
say.
and I think that's because we've, um, our team possesses those qualities before they even came in the door.
Right.
Because they were drawn to us, again, because of our transparency and our very, we're not shy about these things. We talk about these things at length. And so people self-select.
Right.
They select us as much as we select them.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that and going through all those pieces. I want to kind of point this back to you and your partners a little bit. Is like, how has that based? So you've been in the law industry for a very long time, and have had experiences with, I imagine, all kinds of law firms which you weren't the co-founder of. How has
Yep.
that now helped influence, I guess, how the three of you continue to hold these values, important, and how you've learned to structure and iterate what that means to run and operate this company as a partnership of three?
So how has past experience influenced where we are now? Is that what I'm
Yeah.
understanding? Yeah. So you're right. Prior to Ascent, I've been at 1, 2, 3, 4. This is my fifth job in law in 13 years. So that's not a very good track record. Um, but over that time, you see, I was able to draw on past experience and identify what I identified with and what I didn't. And so over those 4 jobs and 10 years, I had absolutely fabulous mentors, and I had absolutely terrible mentors, right? Who I did not particularly value or admire all that much.
Right.
And it was quite telling, the thought process that went into where did I feel the safest? Where did I have the most trust? Where did I feel like I belonged the most? And I remember the answer to this. I'll never forget my very first law firm, um, Lawson Kramer in New Brunswick. And I worked with a lady there named Natalie Godbout, who's now a judge. And I always felt that she deeply cared for me, that she was heavily invested in my well-being, and that she had all the time in the world for me and to help shape my growth and to help shape my professional development. Um, she was patient with me when I made mistakes. She gave me autonomy without feeling like I was on my own or abandoned, right? And here I am today, 10 years later, I'm still talking about her, right?
Right.
I also had examples where it was, where I was working with people and they were just a symbol of what I didn't value. Um, the biggest one for me that stood out was an example where somebody I felt, breached their personal or professional integrity, where the conversation between their words, what they professed,
Right.
and their actions did not seem in alignment. And again, it just totally undermined any trust that I could place in that relationship, right? And so now coming forward and creating my own law firm, I'm not going to sit here and profess that I'm perfect. Of course, I've made mistakes, right? Especially when you're entering into being an entrepreneur. For the first time, you're going to make all kinds of mistakes, especially when you're managing people for the first time. You're going to make all kinds of mistakes, right? But one thing that I hope rings true is that everybody I work with, everybody that I oversee and manage, anybody that I mentor, I want them to feel like I care and that I'm profoundly invested in their success. And my hope is that will create an underlying relationship of trust and confidence, which is paramount. It is fundamental to a healthy, functioning employment relationship. And I learned that in the nature of my job, right? So this isn't just David, the entrepreneur, speaking. This is also David, the employment law lawyer, speaking here. This goes all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada. They've come out and said that employment is fundamentally one that is integral to the person's identity, and it's based on a relationship of trust. And I'm very mindful of that because a toxic work environment, a corrosive working environment, one where there is no trust, where there's no synergistic exchanges taking place, it is it's noxious for individual and professional well-being.
Right.
And even if I make a mistake, I want people to know that at the end of the day, I still care and that I'm still invested in them being successful.
I think that's a really important place to be, and it's interesting to hear that even the Supreme Court of Canada has stated that how integral employment is to that, and you seeing that, have experienced it, being in employment law, like that's kind of why you have a job, is because there's a lot of situations where that confidence and trust are not present, and have bad situations happen which need the support of the law and people in your profession. And now being able to bring that into a brand new firm and bring that together with three partners, but as you add partnership as well, like that has its own set of challenges, and being able to navigate that and still be present and going, hey, I'm going to bring my humanity into all of this, see you as the human, and hopefully when you think I've made a misstep, you will see my humanity as well.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm quite transparent about is there's a certain stigma associated with making a mistake. You see this everywhere, right?
Yes.
There's a shame associated with it. And I want to banish that from my team. If you make a mistake, I will never fault somebody for coming forward and saying, David, I made a mistake and I need help. You know, asking for help is not a sign of weakness. Asking for help is refusing to give up, right? That's my perspective on this.
I love
where I get frustrated is when somebody makes a mistake and is either dishonest about it or they try to cover it up, right? I like to look at mistakes as learning opportunities for everybody.
Yeah.
And personally, I do this constantly with my team. If I F up, I will be the first to say I'm sorry, and I will be the first to say, here's what I've taken from this.
Right.
And you can talk to any one of my partners multiple times that I've effed up, and I'm right back there saying,
here it
this
is
one's on me, and here's what I'm going to learn from this.
Well, and I think there's a power. I love the like ripping the shame component out of it. Is like when I ran teams, like one of my favorite things to have at the start of talking with our production floor was like, mistakes are great. What aren't great is like hiding from them and then letting them become a second, third same mistake. I love brand new mistakes. Let's bring them. Let's learn from them. Let's do something fun with them, and not hide them away. In fact, let's put them on the board so everybody can learn from them without you feeling shame about it. It's like if we're not making, on the flip side of it as well, it's like as growing a company as an entrepreneur, as an owner, as a partner, it'd be like part of that is like you want to grow the company. And if you're not making mistakes, you're not living up to your courage, which means that you're not hitting your capacity to grow and find new ways to serve through your values as well. So like mistakes are a prime example of that. We're doing the right things instead of that stigma of going, oh, there's a mistake, that means we're doing the wrong things. Be like, no, if there was no mistakes, we'd be in our comfort zone, not growing and waiting to be taken over.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that, 100%.
Yeah.
It's a hard lesson to pass on, though, because it's, for so many people, it's embedded, right?
Yeah.
That mistakes it's more commonly associated with shame than it is with growth.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to root that out. But how I try to do is to lead by example. Yeah. And so I will be the first to, cast a spotlight on where I've made mistakes and use it as a lesson for everybody.
And as a leader, I think a big part of being in a leadership role is that that's you choosing to take the first step. Because a lot of people, no matter what it is to living up to any of the values that you have or removing, at least when they're at work, they can start to learn that mistakes aren't a bad thing. Now, hopefully that will spread into the rest of their lives, but like for 8 hours to 10 hours a day, depending on what's happening in your industry, is like, imagine being in that space where it's like, it's okay to push myself and it's okay to make the mistakes and not feel like the world's worst person. Be like, that'd be my favorite place to go live for 8 to 10 hours every day.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that's a really important message that a lot of people can take, and showing that to do that, it's not one of those things that you have to preach up from the hill going, mistakes are our friend. Be like, actually, you're in there showing, here's where I made a mistake, here's where it's a friend, I've fallen on the sword, I've owned it, now I get to share it with all of you.
Where would you rather be, like in the trenches or on the sidelines? And
well, if you're gonna play the game, you better be in there.
That's right. The man in the arena, that's where we find our greatest growth.
Yeah.
And it's where we find our most meaningful and fulfilling work, I find.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to scoot back to where we kind of pointed to at the beginning of our conversations. Like, so you started Ascent in 2020. 2020 had its own set of constraints for running a business, no less starting a business. So you started a brand new law firm in 2020 as a wholly remote experience, and it's still a completely remote organization. Can you walk us through a little bit about what was that like, building a brand new company, finding the ways to make the structures, to make the communication work, and to continue to thrive as a business, and what that's meant for the community, the culture, and everything within your business. There's a lot there to unpack, so I'll just toss that over to you
Yeah,
now.
no, I'm happy to talk about our remote experience. So when we first started the firm up, it was really four of us. So there was the three original partners, and then we had one like reception office manager assistant that worked with us as well. And it it was originally done. We were originally remote, just as a cost saving exercise. We were this brand new startup. There was a lot of uncertainty, of course, when you're doing this. Like, are the clients going to follow? Is the work going to follow? Are we going to be
Yeah.
twiddling our thumbs in 2 months' time? And so we were originally just trying to stay, very lean, right, in our cost. And we promised ourselves that, after 6 months or after a year, we'd revisit the question and see where we're at. And we've done that. We've come back and said, are we still liking the remote? Do we want to change this? And consistently what we found is we're happy. We're all happy working remote. And this is actually broadened out to the rest of our team as we brought on more associates and paralegals and everybody else. There's, I think, a fairly decent size of the population now that seek out this kind of work, that seek out working from home. Most of our team is based in the Vancouver area, like in the Lower Mainland. And so if you've got people that are in Surrey or in Richmond or in North Vancouver, and you're asking them to commute downtown every single day, that's incredibly taxing. It's expensive. It's very time consuming, and to be quite honest, it's not time or money well spent in our mind. Secondly, we're very mindful as well of the environmental impact of having physical office locations. So Ascent, we are what we call, we're a B Corp, so we're B Corp certified through the Brooklyn Institute. And what the Brooklyn Institute, what B Corp designation does is it basically signals to the broader community that we have this ongoing commitment to sustainable environmental practices, work practices, workers' right, and to community involvement, right? And I'm simplifying that a little bit, but nonetheless. And so we've actually been, in 2022, we were actually carbon negative, which means that our carbon footprint was so small that we were actually able to offset it entirely and then go into the negative by buying carbon credits. And we wouldn't have been able to do that with nearly the same level of ease if we were asking our team to commute every day. So from our perspective, it's cheaper, it's a good business practice. Second of all, it's a good HR practice because it leads to what we believe to be a better quality of life for our people. And third, it's good for the environment, and it keeps cars off the roads, which I don't want to minimize. I don't want to undermine the impact that has, because I think it is significant. Transportation emissions represent 30% of Canada's emissions, and if we can be a small contributor to that reduction, then it's a win for us. So, and again, like we find that it hasn't been negative for recruitment. In fact, it's actually been a positive that we are attracting candidates that might not otherwise come to us.
Right.
And then secondly, just to expand on that a little bit more, one of the most important things about working remote is that you have to find ways to connect with people. Like, there has to be connection points nonetheless. Otherwise, people are just working in silos. And then you also have to have a high level of trust with your team, because, as a manager, you're not there for like the detailed supervision that you might have in an office environment. You can't just see if somebody's playing solitaire. Like, you have to trust that they're not playing solitaire, right?
Yeah.
And we're not, of course, going to be installing like tracking softwares or anything like that, or some kind of like software like that. So to kind of just like round out this point, we put a very conscious effort into finding contact points with our people in person. So we meet probably once a month, where we'll take everyone out for lunch, or we'll have like what we call like in-person work days downtown. We'll rent like an office space and everybody comes down and we work together. Um, our staff meetings are very important to us. Like, we spend an hour every Tuesday. It's part social, it's part talking about our values, it's part talking about our work. It's very structured, but it's very meaningful to have that
Right.
conversation with people. Um, like I mentioned before, we have an embedded mentorship culture and learning culture within the firm, so that everybody has a mentor, like including like our office manager and receptionist. Like, she has a mentor that she's working with, and she's identifying growth areas for growth and improvement.
That's
Um,
incredible.
and then we will never, you know, tell somebody that you can't just, have a 30-minute virtual coffee with one of your coworkers. Like, we encourage it, right?
Right.
We encourage that creativity and that curiosity and learning about your peers.
Yeah. That's incredible. And to be able to structure that and build it and create this space of like thriving and I even like hearing that you're encouraging the 30-minute coffees because like that's the thing that gets missed from the in-person experiences, like the accidental bump ins going, oh, we should catch up, let's go grab a quick coffee and have a 10-15 minute conversation around who you are and what's happening in your world.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, our fear is that if we discourage that, working virtually can be very lonely if you don't have a culture or an environment that can give social exchanges.
Yeah.
Depending on personality type, like there are some personalities that are quite content just to stay in their zone and stay in their silo and not exit it, right?
Yeah.
But especially for like more extroverted personalities, they need to have that contact. Um, and it can be a little bit tricky when you're in a completely virtual environment, but it's by no means impossible.
Yeah.
It's very doable.
That's awesome. Well, Dave, you know how I said at the start I was going to look up and realize we've kind of lost track of time. I want to be respectful of your time today. There's been a lot of great gems that you've shared. And as we kind of wrap it up, I want to give you an opportunity to shout out Ascent Law and what you guys are up to and if there's any big events coming down the pipe.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, Ascent Employment Law, like I've mentioned, I think throughout this podcast, so we assist with HR workplace law disputes. So, for an individual, this can be somebody that's going through, bullying or facing termination or feeling that they're being discriminated or not treated properly at work. And we answer those questions. Um, it can also be like working with a company, like on the management side of things, whether it's collective bargaining or contract implementation or policy development or going through, discipline or a workplace termination. We assist with these kinds of things. Some of the upcoming talks that we're looking at right now. So we offer monthly, we call them employer huddles. And what a huddle is it's basically like a short form webinar where we have at least one or two of our lawyers, then often with like an outside guest coming in and talking about relevant HR issues. So we actually have one coming up, I believe it's on March 31st, and we're going to be talking about a business sale. So if you're a business owner and you're looking to sell your business, we're partnering up with a corporate lawyer who's going to be talking about, the actual structuring of a deal, and then of course we're going to be talking about the HR implication of all of this.
Right.
The transitioning staff, hiring. What happens if you don't want to keep everybody on? What kind of ongoing responsibilities do you have? These kinds of questions. So they're always really well attended and they're always very diverse conversations. But if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that, check out our website or just send me a note to David at ascentemploymentlaw.ca.
Perfect. And when you're watching this, all the links are down below in the show notes to go check out Ascent Employment Law, connect with them on Twitter and as well on LinkedIn.
Yeah, we're most I think like yourself, like our biggest social base is on LinkedIn, and we're pretty active on there with a fairly large following. So please, reach out, follow us. Follow us. My partner Richard is constantly putting out fantastic content on the areas that we work with.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you so much for your insights today, David. Before I let you go, I want to ask you the one last question that I ask all guests is what is your personal definition of self-trust?
Hmm. Good question. Um, I'm going to nerd out here a little bit.
All right, let's do
I read a lot of philosophy. You know where this is going, Gene, bringing it.
it.
I read a lot of Stoicism, Stoic philosophy, and so I've read a lot of Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus and Seneca and more modern authors like Ryan Holiday. And one of the things that I kind of come back to, and it's very simple. We define like this fundamental question of what's in our control and what's outside of our control. What's outside of our control is everything that is imposed on us. The weather, somebody's mean to us, my health has been imposed on me. I might have some kind of health episode, or I might lose my job. And these are all actions that are outside of us. What's always within our control is our reasoned choice. It's our choice. But the word here, reasoned, is really important, meaning that you sit with it. It's reflective. It's not an emotional reaction, right? So when I'm talking about self-trust, for me, it fundamentally comes down to, am I acting on my reasoned choice in alignment with my personal integrity, my personal ethics? If I can answer yes to that, then I'm comfortable with any outcomes that come my way. When I created Ascent, it fundamentally came down to asking that question. I'm faced with an obstacle here. If I stay in my status quo, am I going to be living in alignment with my ethics and my integrity? Or am I willing to take the plunge, trust where I'm going with this, trust my integrity and my principles, and that I'll come through, right? And as an entrepreneur, when you're starting a new business, I could have fallen on my face. Thankfully I didn't. Thankfully we're here, 2.5 years later, and we're doing quite well, and we're growing, and everything else is going along. But it was a reasoned choice that was in full alignment with my personal ethics. And regardless of the outcome, which is an outside event that I have no control over, I was quite comfortable with the personal decision that I made there, because it was one that was made. I trusted myself. I trusted my ethics and my judgment.
That's a powerful answer to that question. Thank you for diving into that one, Dave. I had a feeling it was going to go the route that it went, and at least inspired by some great names.
Yeah.
All right. So again, thank you, Dave, for being on episode 109 today. It's been a wonderful conversation. And to everybody else who's watched and followed along, thank you very much. And we will see you all next week.